This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a special program on the final journey of Queen Elizabeth II.
The royal funeral brought an end to 11 days of national mourning across the United Kingdom that has seen the royal family's sorrow play out in the glare of intense international attention. After days of lying in state, the body of the late Queen Elizabeth II began its final journey later as part of a grand state funeral, first to Westminster Abbey for a religious service in front of a congregation of thousands and then on to Windsor Castle for a more intimate committal service and a private burial. It was a day of emotion, pomp and ceremony, the likes of which has not been seen since the last state funeral of Winston Churchill almost 60 years ago. The Queen's lying in state at Westminster Hall in the heart of London, where people queued for hours to view her coffin, was an emotional and ever-remaining moment for the people of Britain. A short distance away, at Westminster Abbey, the doors were opened for guests to start arriving ahead of the funeral service at 11 in the morning. Members of royal families from across Europe, many of whom were blood relatives of the Queen, Belgium's King Philippe and Queen Matilda, and Spain's King Philippe and Queen Letizia, were also a part of the ceremony. To mourn the death of Britain's longest-serving monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, the President of India, Draupadi Murmu, is in London on a 3-day visit. President Murmu, accompanied by Acting High Commissioner Sujit Ghosh, reached the Lancaster House in London on Saturday evening. Madam President Murmu signed a condolence book on behalf of the Indian government on Sunday. After the funeral of the Queen of England that took place today, the Indian President further joined around 500 world leaders and worldwide royals in a congregation of around 2,000 people at the Abbey for a somber ceremony that concluded with a 2-minute silence. Ahead of today's funeral service, the President was invited to a reception hosted by King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla at Buckingham Palace. All visiting heads of state, government and official overseas guests at what has been described as an official state event. In a funeral procession, Queen Elizabeth was carried on the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy, drawn by 142 sailors. The carriage was last seen in 1979 for the funeral of Prince Philip's uncle, Lord Mountbatten, and was used for the Queen's father, George V, in 1952. In the funeral procession, the new king and his sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, followed the gun carriage in procession. The pipes and drums of the Scottish and Irish regiments led the ceremony, along with members of the Royal Air Force and the Gurkhas. The route was lined by the Royal Navy and Royal Marines and a guard of honour that stood in Parliament Square, made up of all 3 military services, accompanied by a Royal Marines band. The Queen's funeral service was a state funeral, an event typically reserved for kings or queens, which follows strict rules of protocol, such as a military procession and the lying in state. Westminster Abbey hosted the funeral service, is the historic church where Britain's kings and queens are crowned, including the Queen's own coronation in 1953. It was also where the then Princess Elizabeth married Prince Philip in 1947. Queen Elizabeth shared a special relationship with India. She visited India thrice and hosted various Indian presidents from Radhakrishnan to Pratibha Patil. She was never afraid to accept the dark past of colonialism and was open to express her emotions. In 2009, during her state banquet address, Queen Elizabeth said, "Nearly 2 million of our own citizens are tied by descent and enduring family links to India. They represent one of the United Kingdom's most dynamic and successful communities. Relations between our two countries are built on strong and deep foundations and are set fair for the 21st century." An important component of the Queen's relationship with India is the sizable and vibrant Indian diaspora in the UK. Her engagement with this community has encompassed numerous memorable moments.
Relations between our two countries are built on strong and deep foundations and are set fair for the 21st century. The United Kingdom is proud to have more than 30,000 Indian students in our universities every year. In the future, we hope that many more British students will go to study in Indian universities, making this a genuinely two-way exchange of learning. Your visit will also celebrate the growing and dynamic economic relationship between our two countries. We look forward to the expansion of this in many spheres, from manufacturing to filmmaking, from joint research to the development of cutting-edge green technologies.
Interestingly, Queen Elizabeth's funeral was the first monarch's funeral service in Westminster Abbey since the 18th century, although the funeral of the Queen Mother was held there in 2002. The funeral service was conducted by the Dean of Westminster, David Hoyle, with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, giving the sermon. The newly elected UK Prime Minister Liz Truss read a lesson. The Westminster Castle, continuously inhabited by 40 monarchs across almost 1,000 years, had special significance to the Queen throughout her life. As a teenager, she was sent to the castle during the war years as London faced the threat of bombing, and more recently she made it her permanent home during the coronavirus pandemic. During the procession, the castle's Sebastopol and curfew tower bells were tolled every minute and gun salutes were fired from the castle's grounds. After the televised service, the Queen's coffin was transferred by royal hearse into St. George's Chapel for a comital service, where the imperial state crown and the sovereign's orb and scepter was removed from the top of the coffin by the crown jeweler, separating the Queen from her crown for the final time. At the end of the last hymn, the King then placed the Queen's company camp colour or flag of the Grenadier Guards on the coffin as the last respect. The Grenadier Guards are the most senior of the Foot Guards, carrying out ceremonial duties for the monarch. At the same time, Lord Chamberlain, former MI5 chief Baron Parker, broke his wand of office and placed it on the coffin. The snapping of the white staff signalled the end of service to the sovereign as her most senior official in the royal household. The Queen was then lowered into the royal vault and the sovereign's piper played before a blessing and a singing of God Save the King. In a special request of Queen Elizabeth for her funeral procession, there was a performance by the piper at Windsor. Queen Elizabeth was then buried alongside her husband Prince Philip in a small chapel in the grounds of Windsor Castle in a private ceremony after her state funeral, with text engraved Elizabeth II from 1926 to 2022. Britain's King Charles III reflected upon his late mother's lifelong service in a thank you message ahead of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral at Westminster Abbey in London on Monday morning.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family. And we owe her the most heartfelt debt any family could owe to their mother. for her love, affection, guidance, understanding and example. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today. Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years in which my mother, as Queen, served the people of so many nations. In 1947, on her 21st birthday, she pledged in a broadcast from Cape Town to the Commonwealth to devote her life, whether it be short or long, to the service of her peoples. That was more than a promise. It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life.
In a tribute to Queen Elizabeth, US President Joe Biden tweeted, "To all the people of England, all the people in the United Kingdom, our hearts go out to you. You were fortunate to have Queen Elizabeth for 70 years. We all were." During Queen Elizabeth's reign, 17 countries discarded the monarchy and became republics, the latest being the tiny island nation of Barbados earlier this year, although it continues to be part of the Commonwealth. With Charles now king, that trend is likely to continue. The Prime Minister of Bahamas, Philip Davis, said he intended to hold a referendum to remove Elizabeth's son and successor, King Charles III, as the official head of state in the Bahamas and turn his country, which has been independent since 1973, into a republic. Queen Elizabeth II reigned for more than 70 years, and the majority of people have never known anyone else on the throne. Since becoming the monarch in 1952, her image and cipher has been part of everyday life, emblazoned across the UK. Many believe it was Queen Elizabeth's avoidance of any political controversy as head of state and her refusal to bend the monarchy to the winds of fashion that enabled Elizabeth to triumph in the role that would earn her the love and respect of so many as the head of nation. With time, Queen Elizabeth understood that not everything in national life had to have an explicit purpose, that for a conservative nation in the throes of near ceaseless change, the continuity she represented in person and in office had a value beyond measure. Queen Elizabeth understood that the rhythm of monarchy, the traditions and ceremonies, the births and the weddings and the deaths provided a comfort to those sometimes bewildered by the uprooting of the past and served as a reminder that the drumbeat of life was shared across class, age and circumstance. The longest-serving British monarch, Queen Elizabeth, had believed in the great unwritten role of modern-day Britain monarchy. This is where, unprotected by tradition and unprepared by precedent, Queen Elizabeth drove her reign alone.
You were listening to a special program on the final journey of Queen Elizabeth II. This program was scripted by Om Vesh Upadhyay, narrated by Saira Mujtaba, and produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.